Welcome to another night of shadows and dreams with your own Uncle Grim. Tonight's journey, it is a dark one indeed, of a place called Arkham. The story is beginning. The rain is starting to fall on Gotham. The rain in Gotham City wasn't like rain anywhere else. It didn't cleanse. It didn't wash the streets or offer the promise of a fresh start. It was a thin, greasy drizzle that seemed to fall from a sky the color of a day-old bruise. It clung to the gargoyles, ran in grimy rivulets down the sides of Gothic spires, and pooled in the gutters with an oily sheen. This was the rain that greeted Dr. Eris Thorne as his taxi cab, a relic from a bygone era, with springs that groaned in protest at every pothole, made its slow, reluctant journey towards the outskirts of the city. He watched the water streak down the window, distorting the neon signs of the inner city into blurry, bleeding watercolors of red and blue. Each drop seemed to carry a piece of the city's exhaustion, its deep-seated cynicism. Eris, by contrast, felt a thrum of nervous energy, a knot of idealism and ambition tightening in his stomach. He was young, just 28, with a mind full of theories, from Freud to Jung, and a heart full of a naive belief that he could actually help people, that he could shine a light into the darkest corners of the human psyche and lead the lost back into the sun. This belief had brought him here, to the one place most of his colleagues at the university had spoken of in hushed, cautionary tones. Arkham Asylum. The name itself was a piece of theater, a Gothic flourish that was either a stroke of branding genius or a grimly honest label. The taxi driver, a man whose face seemed to be permanently fixed in a weary scowl, hadn't said a word since Eris had given him the destination. He just grunted, and the silence in the cab had grown heavier with each passing mile, thick and suffocating like the damp air. They left the last vestiges of the city's glow behind them, plunging into a darkness that was older and more profound. The road narrowed, winding through a gnarled, ancient wood where the trees grew too close together, their branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. Finally, through the mist and the relentless rain, he saw it. Arkham Asylum did not rise from the ground so much as it clawed its way out. It was a sprawling, monstrous edifice of Victorian architecture gone mad. Spires like broken teeth bit at the bruised sky. Countless windows, most of them dark, stared out like the vacant eyes of a skull. A high, wrought iron fence, tipped with cruel-looking spikes, surrounded the property like a rusted rib cage. At the center of it all was a massive oak door, bound in black iron, set beneath a pointed archway, carved with leering, half-eroded faces of demons and angels, their expressions indistinguishable in the gloom. The entire building seemed to be leaning, sagging under the weight of its own history, its own sorrow. It looked less like a hospital and more like a tomb that had forgotten its purpose. Eris felt the first real tremor of doubt, a cold snake slithering up his spine. The textbooks and case studies hadn't prepared him for the sheer malevolence of the place's presence. It felt alive, and it felt unwell. The taxi shuddered to a halt before the main gate. The driver finally spoke, his voice a gravelly rasp. "This is it, Doc." End of the line. He didn't turn around. His eyes were fixed on the building in the rearview mirror, as if afraid to look at it directly. Eris paid the man, his hands feeling clumsy and cold. He fumbled with his suitcase, the handle slick with rain, as he stepped out onto the cracked asphalt. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth, decaying leaves, and something else. Something metallic and faintly institutional, like old blood and disinfectant. The gate was manned by a single guard in a heavy black raincoat, his face hidden in shadow beneath the brim of his cap. He checked Eris's papers with a bored, methodical slowness, his flashlight beam cutting a shaky path across the letter of appointment, signed by the asylum's director, Dr. Jeremiah Arkham. "New meat," the guard grumbled, more to himself than to Eris. He pulled a heavy lever, and the gates groaned open with a sound like a dying beast. Welcome to the madhouse. Eris swallowed hard, forcing a confidence he didn't feel. He walked up the long, winding path to the main entrance, his shoes crunching on the wet gravel. The asylum loomed larger with every step, its oppressive shadow falling over him. He could hear things now, carried on the damp wind. A faint, rhythmic banging from one of the upper windows. A sudden, high-pitched shriek that was cut off abruptly. And beneath it all, a low, constant hum, like faulty wiring or a million trapped whispers. He reached the great oak door and hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the large iron ring that served as a knocker.
This was it. The point of no return. He was stepping into the abyss his professors had warned him about. The place where the monsters of Gotham were kept. But he wasn't here for the monsters. He was here for the men and women trapped inside them. With a deep breath that did little to calm his racing heart, he lifted the heavy ring and let it fall. The sound echoed, impossibly loud in the disquieting evening. A hollow boom that sounded like a coffin lid slamming shut. The door was opened, not by a nurse or an orderly, but by a man who seemed as much a part of the building as the stone itself. He was huge, a mountain of a man, with a scarred, stoic face, and the name Cash embroidered on his uniform. He looked Eris up and down, his gaze lingering for a moment, an assessment devoid of warmth. Dr. Thorne, he grunted. Eris nodded. Follow me. Director's expecting you. The inside of the asylum was somehow even more oppressive than the outside. The air was heavy and stagnant, thick with the scents Eris had smelled outside, now amplified 100-fold. The grand foyer was a cavern of shadows, the vaulted ceiling lost in darkness far above. The floor was black and white checkered tile, scuffed and worn. A grand staircase, its banister carved into writhing serpents, swept upwards into the gloom. Everything was coated in a thin layer of grime, And the silence here was different. It wasn't empty. It was full, pregnant with unspoken horrors. Cash led him down a long corridor, his footsteps echoing alongside Eris's much lighter, more hesitant ones. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced men, former directors and benefactors, their painted eyes seeming to follow him as he passed. They walked past heavy, steel-reinforced doors with small, barred windows. From behind one, a voice, soft and childlike, began to sing a nursery rhyme. The words slightly off. The melody twisted into something discordant and unnerving. From another, a torrent of whispered profanities spilled out, venomous and incoherent. Eris tried to keep his expression neutral, professional, but his heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't a hospital. It was a cage, a place where sanity came to die. Cash seemed oblivious to the sounds, his pace unchanging. They finally reached a door at the end of the hall, grander than the others, with a polished brass plaque that read, Dr. Jeremiah Arkham, Director. Cash knocked once, a sharp rap of his knuckles, and a weary voice from within called out, Enter. Dr. Jeremiah Arkham was a man who looked as tired as his asylum. He was thin and pale, with deep, dark circles under his eyes that spoke of countless, sleepless nights. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk, cluttered with papers, books, and what looked like a half-finished model of a ship. The office was the only room Eris had seen so far. It seemed to be fighting against the encroaching decay. The bookshelves were full. The wood was polished, and a small fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm, flickering light. But even here, the gloom seemed to press in at the windows. Dr. Thorne, Jeremiah said, gesturing to a leather armchair opposite his desk. Welcome to Arkham. Forgive me for not getting up. It has been a long day. Eris sat, placing his briefcase on the floor beside him. It's an honor, sir. I've read all your papers on psychopathic reformation. Jeremiah managed a thin, weary smile. Idealism, a young man's game. I hope you've brought plenty of it with you, son. It gets used up rather quickly here. He steepled his fingers, his gaze intense. Let me be frank, Doctor. We are understaffed, underfunded, and overwhelmed. The city sends us its nightmares, and we are expected to tuck them into bed. Your predecessor, Dr. Adams, he couldn't take the pressure. He left rather abruptly. There was a finality in his tone that suggested left was a euphemism. I hired you because your resume showed promise. You have new ideas, new techniques, but ideas are fragile things in a place like this. The very walls have a way of pushing back. He paused, looking into the fire. Your quarters have been prepared in the staff wing. Cash will show you. You'll start tomorrow. I'm assigning you to the general population ward first. Get your feet wet. But there is one patient I want you to start observing. Unofficially. For now. A long-term resident. His name is Silas Croft. Silas Croft? Aris asked, the name unfamiliar. He had spent months studying the files of Arkham's most infamous residents. The Joker, the Riddler, Crane, Isley. He had never heard of a Silas Croft. He's not one of the celebrities, Jeremiah said, a hint of disdain in his voice. He's something else. Quieter. Been here for decades. His diagnosis is a collage of failures. Schizophrenia. Dissociative identity disorder. You name it. On the surface, he's a model patient. Compliant, quiet, keeps to himself. But he has an effect on people. A disquieting one. Later that night, in his small, Spartan room in the staff wing, Aris sat with the file open before him. The room was cold, the radiator emitting only a faint, ticking warmth. The rain continued its relentless drumming against the window pane. He could still hear the asylum around him, a living, breathing creature. A distant scream, the squeak of an orderly's rubber-soled shoes, and a new sound, a faint, melodic whistling that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. He tried to ignore it and focus on the file. The contents were sparse for a man who had been incarcerated for decades. A grainy black and white photograph showed a pale, thin man with haunted, intelligent eyes. He couldn't have been more than 30 in the picture. The initial reports described him as a musician, a flutist of some local renown, committed after a violent episode where he claimed the music of the city had told him to silence the discord. The subsequent pages were a mess of contradictory notes from dozens of doctors over the years, catatonic for weeks at a time, displays moments of startling lucidity, seems to know things about the staff. He has no way of knowing. Patient exhibits a compulsive whistling habit. The melody is unsettling. The final entries were from Dr. Adams, his predecessor. The handwriting grew increasingly frantic and sloppy. Adams wrote of long, one-sided conversations with Croft, where the man would say nothing, only listen, and whistle his strange, meandering tune. Adams became convinced that Croft wasn't mad in the conventional sense. He wrote, "He's not a patient. He's a receiver, an antenna for the madness of this place. The building, it speaks through him. That damned whistling is its voice." The very last entry, dated the day before Adams's abrupt departure, was a single, terrifying sentence scrawled across the page. "I hear it now, even when he's not here. The song is inside me." Eris closed the file, a cold knot of dread tightening in his gut. He could still hear the whistling, faint and distant, a lonely, haunting melody that seemed to weave itself into the very fabric of the asylum's oppressive silence. He looked out the window at the rain-slicked grounds and the dark, twisted shapes of the trees. He had wanted to shine a light into the darkness, but as he sat there, in the heart of Arkham, he had the terrible, sinking feeling that the darkness was already starting to shine back. The first week was a baptism by fire, a disorienting plunge into the managed chaos of Arkham's general population ward. The ward, officially named the Elizabeth Arkham Wing for the chronically disturbed, was a long, echoing hall painted a shade of institutional green that seemed specifically designed to induce nausea. The air was a constant cocktail of antiseptic, sweat, and despair. Eris's days were a blur of patient interviews, medication reviews, and group therapy sessions that often devolved into shouting matches or unnerving collective silences. He met men who believed they were kings, women who spoke to angels only they could see, and souls so shattered they could do nothing but stare at the peeling paint on the walls, their expressions vacant. He tried his best to apply his training, to listen with empathy, to find the rational mind buried beneath the layers of delusion. He had some small successes. He managed to calm a patient who was terrified of the color blue by patiently explaining its chemical properties. And he convinced another to start eating again by sitting with her in silence for an hour every day at lunch. Yet, for every small step forward, the asylum seemed to drag him 2 steps back. He saw the burnout in the eyes of the other staff members, the weary cynicism of the orderlies, the exhausted resignation of the few other doctors. They treated the patients not as people to be healed, but as problems to be managed, contained. The goal was not recovery, but quiet. Sedation was the tool of choice, a chemical blanket thrown over the fires of the mind. Eris resisted, arguing for more therapy, more cognitive exercises, but his suggestions were often met with tired smiles and knowing looks. He was the new blood, still full of that university nonsense. He would learn. The nights were the worst. The asylum seemed to shed its thin veneer of a medical facility and reveal its true nature as a place of torment. The screams were louder, the whispers more insistent. He started having nightmares, vivid and disturbing, of wandering lost through endless, shifting corridors, the walls weeping a black, viscous fluid. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding. The faint, haunting sound of whistling
echoing in his ears. He saw Silas Croft for the first time on his fourth day. He was in the common room, a large, cheerless space with bolted down furniture and windows covered in thick metal mesh. Most of the patients were watching a blaring television or shuffling aimlessly around the room. But in a corner, sitting perfectly still in a plastic chair, was a man Eris recognized instantly from the photograph. Silas Croft was older now, his hair a shock of white, his face a roadmap of fine lines, but his eyes were the same, dark, intelligent, and deeply unsettling. He was staring at a blank spot on the wall. A faint, almost imperceptible smile on his lips, and he was whistling. The tune was soft, barely audible over the din of the room, but Eris felt it more than he heard it. It was a complex, meandering melody, full of unexpected shifts and minor keys. It wasn't a familiar song. It felt improvised, a stream of consciousness piece of music. It was strangely beautiful, but it made the hairs on the back of Eris's neck stand on end. As Eris watched, one of the more volatile patients, a large man named Hank who was prone to violent outbursts, suddenly stopped his pacing. He turned his head, as if listening to something, and his agitated expression slowly softened. He walked over to the window, pressed his forehead against the cool mesh, and became completely still, his breathing evening out. It was as if the music had soothed him, hypnotized him. Eris felt a shiver run down his spine. He remembered Dr. Adams's frantic notes. He has an effect on people. He decided to approach. As he drew closer, the whistling stopped. Silas Croft turned his head slowly and looked directly at him. His eyes were not vacant or crazed. They were lucid, aware. For a moment, Eris felt like the patient being observed. "Dr. Thorne," Silas said, his voice a dry, soft rasp, like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. "The new one. You have kind eyes. They haven't tired yet." Eris was taken aback. "How did you know my name?" Silas's faint smile widened slightly.
The walls whisper, Doctor. You just have to know how to listen. He turned his gaze back to the empty wall. Dr. Adams listened. He listened a little too well. The conversation, if it could be called that, set the tone for their future interactions. Eris made a point of seeking Silas out, trying to engage him in a formal therapy session. But Silas would not cooperate in any traditional sense. He wouldn't answer questions about his past or his feelings. Instead, he would offer cryptic pronouncements, ask unsettlingly personal questions about Eris's own life, or simply sit in silence, whistling his strange, endless tune. During one session, Eris was trying to talk about Silas's initial committal, the violent episode. The records say you heard music, Silas. The music of the city. Silas looked at him, his dark eyes seeming to see right through him. Not the city, Doctor. The stone, the brick, the iron. Every building has a song. This one is a symphony. He gestured vaguely at the room around them. It's an old song, full of pain. Amadeus Arkham wrote the first movement. All the rest of us are just variations on his theme. Eris found himself becoming obsessed, just as Adams had. He spent his nights poring over the asylum's archives, digging into the history of the building and its founder. He learned of Amadeus Arkham's tragic life, how his mother had suffered from mental illness, and he had mercy killed her. How he had later converted his family estate into a modern asylum, only to watch his own wife and daughter be brutally murdered by one of his patients. Amadeus had eventually succumbed to his own madness, scratching strange symbols and phrases into the floor of his own cell before he died. The official story ended there, but Eris found older, stranger documents. Architectural plans that showed corridors that didn't exist. Rooms that had been walled off. And journals from early staff members that spoke of the building itself having a presence. They wrote of strange cold spots, of disembodied whispers, of a feeling of being constantly watched. They called it the Arkham sickness, a creeping paranoia that seemed to infect everyone who stayed too long within its walls. He started to notice things. The way the shadows in the corridors seemed to stretch and twist when he wasn't looking directly at them. The way the portraits of the Arkham family seemed to change their expressions, their stern glares turning to sorrowful pity or sneering contempt. He started to hear the whistling, even when he was alone in his room, miles from Silas Croft's cell. It was in the sigh of the wind through the cracked window frames, in the drip of a leaky pipe, in the hum of the ancient electrical system. The asylum was learning the song, or perhaps the song had been its all along. His colleagues began to notice the change in him. "You look tired, Thorne," one of the older nurses, a kind woman named Eleanor, told him one afternoon. "You're spending too much time on the Croft case. That man is a black hole. He'll pull you in." But Eris couldn't stop. He felt he was on the verge of some terrible discovery, a truth that lay buried beneath decades of pain and madness. He felt that understanding Silas Croft was the key to understanding Arkham itself. One rainy Tuesday, during a session, Silas was unusually quiet. He wasn't whistling. He just stared at Eris, his eyes filled with a strange sort of pity. "You're digging, aren't you, Doctor?" he whispered. "In the old places, the quiet places." Eris felt a jolt of fear. "You're looking for the heart. Every house has one. This one's is just a little harder to find. And it's still beating." Before Eris could ask what he meant, Silas pointed a long, bony finger at a small water stain on the ceiling. "Dr. Adams found a door," he said, "behind the truth, in the place where Amadeus wept. It's still open for you." And then he started whistling again. A new melody this time, one that was slower, sadder, and filled with an almost unbearable sense of loss. That night, Eris couldn't sleep. Silas's words echoed in his mind. in the place where Amadeus wept. He cross-referenced the old asylum blueprints with Amadeus Arkham's personal journal. He found it. A small, private study on the third floor of the original manor, now part of the maximum security wing. Amadeus's journal described it as the room where he retreated after the death of his family, where he spent weeks in a state of profound grief. The room was no longer on any modern map of the asylum. It had been walled off, absorbed into the structure, driven by a desperate, obsessive need to understand. Eris took a master key from the main office and made his way to the third floor. The wing was silent. The inmates sedated for the night. The only sound was the rain and his own ragged breathing. He found the spot where the study should have been. A long, featureless stretch of wall. He ran his hands over the cold, grimy wallpaper, feeling for any imperfection. His fingers brushed against a faint outline, a seam almost invisible to the eye. Using a letter opener from his pocket, he pried at the edge. A section of the wall came loose, revealing not brick and plaster, but the dark, heavy wood of an old door. There was no handle, only a small keyhole. Taking a deep breath, he inserted the master key. With a rusty, grinding click, the lock turned. The door swung inward on silent hinges, releasing a gust of stale, cold air that smelled of dust and forgotten sorrow. Eris Thorn, flashlight in hand, stepped out of the asylum he knew and into the private madness of Amadeus Arkham. The room was a time capsule of grief. Everything was covered in a thick, gray blanket of dust that muffled all sound. A small writing desk stood against the far wall. A petrified fountain pen resting beside an empty inkwell. A tattered armchair faced a large stone fireplace. Its hearth long, cold. On the mantelpiece sat a single, heartbreaking object. A small porcelain doll with a cracked face, missing one of its button eyes. The air was thick and heavy, and the silence was absolute. It felt like a sacred place tomb of sorrow. And Eris felt like a trespasser. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on the walls. They were not bare. Every inch of the plaster was covered in frantic, overlapping script, scratched into the surface with something sharp. It was Amadeus Arkham's handwriting, the same he had seen in the journals, but here it was wild, unhinged. It was a torrent of mad revelations, a conversation with something he called the Bat, or the spirit of the house. It feeds on misery, one section read. It drew me here. It drew them here. The house is a mouth, and we are its food. Eris's blood ran cold. He moved the light, tracing the spiraling text. And then he saw the phrase, repeated over and over again in one corner, scratched so deeply that the plaster had broken away to reveal the dark wood lath beneath. Silas hears the song. Silas is the key. Eris stumbled back, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. This was not the raving of a grief-stricken man. This was a blueprint for the asylum's very soul. Adams hadn't been delusional. He had been right. His light fell upon the floorboards in the center of the room. They were different from the rest, darker, and covered in the same frantic scratchings as the walls. One phrase stood out, circled again and again. The heart of the house. This was what Silas had meant. Eris knelt down, his fingers tracing the strange symbols. He felt the draft. Pushing against the boards, he found they were loose. He pried one up, then another, revealing a dark, square hole leading down into utter blackness. A narrow stone staircase descended into the foundation of the asylum. A smell wafted up from the opening. An ancient, earthy smell of damp soil, of rot, and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet. It was the smell of fear. He knew he should leave. He should wall this room back up,
walk away, resign from Arkham, and never look back. Every rational part of his mind screamed at him to run, but the obsessive curiosity, the need to know the final, terrible truth, was stronger. It was the part of him that Arkham had been feeding, nurturing. He thought of Dr. Adams. He thought of Silas. He had to see this through to the end. Steeling himself, he switched his flashlight back on, its beam cutting a weak path into the suffocating dark, and began his descent into the heart of the asylum. The stone steps were slick with a strange, dark slime, and they spiraled down into the earth, deeper than seemed possible. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing in on him. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of water from an unseen source. A sound that echoed like a slow, steady heartbeat. The walls of the narrow staircase were rough-hewn stone, part of the original manor's foundation, and they were covered in more of the same strange, unsettling carvings he had seen in the study above. They depicted twisted, bat-like figures and screaming human faces, their mouths open in eternal agony. It was a descent into a medieval vision of hell. After what felt like an eternity, the staircase opened into a small, circular chamber. The room was carved directly from the bedrock beneath the asylum. In the center of the chamber was a simple stone well, about 4 feet across, covered by a heavy iron grate. The smell was stronger here, overpowering. Eris directed his flashlight beam into the well. He couldn't see the bottom. It was a shaft of pure, impenetrable blackness. He ran the light around the walls of the chamber. More carvings. But these were different. They were names. Dozens. Perhaps hundreds of them. Scratched into the stone over centuries. He recognized some from the asylum's history. Martin Mad Dog Hawkins, Amadeus Arkham, Elizabeth Arkham. But there were older names too, in archaic scripts he didn't recognize. And then he saw it, near the bottom, freshly carved, the letters sharp and white against the dark stone. Jeremiah Adams, his predecessor. His breath hitched in his throat. This was no well. It was a grave.
a place of sacrifice. He found the heart, too. A voice whispered from the darkness behind him. Eris spun around, his flashlight beam wildly cutting through the black, his heart leaping into his throat. Standing in the entrance to the staircase, his form wreathed in shadows, was Silas Croft. He wasn't smiling. His face was a mask of profound sadness. "How did you get here?" Eris stammered, his voice trembling. "There are other ways down, Doctor," Silas said softly. "Older ways. The house lets me walk where I please. It knows I am a friend." He stepped into the chamber, his movements unnervingly silent. Amadeus thought he could contain the madness of Gotham. He thought he could build a cage for it. But he built it on the wrong ground. This place, this land has always been a focal point. A place where the veil between worlds is thin. The Miagani, the native tribe that lived here, they knew. They made offerings, kept the entity that lives here placated. Silas gestured to the well. Amadeus didn't understand. He thought he was building a hospital. What he really built was a temple and a lighthouse, a beacon that draws the broken, the frantic, the brilliantly, beautifully insane, right to its door. It calls to them. It called to the Joker. It called to Crane. It called to me. And Doctor, it called to you. Eris shook his head, refusing to believe it. "No, I came here to help people." "Did you?" Silas asked, his voice gentle, persuasive. "Or did you come here because you have a darkness inside you that recognized the darkness here? A curiosity that borders on obsession? A need to understand the broken because you fear the cracks in your own soul?" Every word was a perfectly aimed blow, shattering Eris's self-perception, his carefully constructed identity as a healer. He remembered his lonely childhood, his fascination with morbid stories, his feeling of being an outsider, a detached observer of human emotion. Had he chosen this path out of altruism, or as a way to safely dissect the madness he felt, mirrored within himself? "The building feeds," Silas continued, his voice taking on a strange, rhythmic cadence. "It feeds on strong emotions, pain, grief, fear, rage. Amadeus gave it a feast with his sorrow. Every inmate who screams in the night, every orderly who despairs, they nourish it. They make it stronger." "And you?" Eris managed to ask. "What are you in all of this?" "I am the choir," Silas said, a flicker of a smile returning to his lips. "When I was a boy, I could hear the music in everything, the hum of power lines, the rhythm of the rain. When I came to Gotham, I heard its song, a roar of beautiful, glorious madness. But here I found the conductor. The asylum sings its song, and I just give it voice. I whistle the tune. I calm the ones who need calming, and I stir the ones who need stirring. I help maintain the harmony of the place. He took a step closer, his dark eyes boring into Eris, Dr. Adams. He fought it. He tried to silence the music. He wanted to cure me, to shut the choir down. The house didn't like that. It can't be silenced. So it broke him. It filled his head with its song until there was no room for him anymore. And he came down here and gave it what it wanted, a final, powerful note of despair. The terrible truth of it settled over Eris like a shroud. Adams hadn't left. He had committed suicide, throwing himself into this dark well, adding his own shattered psyche to the asylum's chorus of madness. "What do you want from me?" Eris whispered, his voice hoarse with terror. "The house is changing," Silas said. Old Jeremiah is weak. His belief is failing. The whistling started again, but it wasn't coming from Silas's lips. It was coming from all around them, from the stones, from the well, from the very air. It was a symphony now, complex and overwhelming, full of pain and beauty and terrifying chaos. Eris clamped his hands over his ears, but it did no good. The song was inside his head. He saw flashes, images that weren't his own. He saw Amadeus Arkham scratching at the walls. He saw the Joker laughing as he was dragged through the front doors. He saw Scarecrow's fear toxin seeping through the vents. He saw Adams standing at the edge of the well, a single tear rolling down his cheek. Before he jumped, he saw his own face reflected in the dark water below, his eyes wide with a terrifying, ecstatic understanding. "Don't fight it, Doctor." Silas's voice echoed in his mind, intertwined with the music. "Don't you see? This is not a prison. It's a sanctuary. the world outside, the sane world. It's the real asylum. Here, we are free. Here, we can be our true selves. Here, the madness can sing. Eris stumbled back, his flashlight falling from his nerveless fingers and clattering on the stone floor. It rolled to the edge of the well, its beam pointing down into the infinite black. In that final moment of light, he thought he saw something move in the depths, something vast and ancient and utterly indifferent. The light flickered and died, plunging the chamber into absolute darkness. But Eris could still see. He could see the strange geometry of the asylum, the patterns of madness, the flow of psychic energy. The music swelled, lifting him up, washing away his fear, his identity, his very self. Dr. Eris Thorne, the idealistic young psychiatrist, was gone. The man who had wanted to heal was erased. All that was left was a quiet, empty space, waiting to be filled. He slowly lowered his hands from his ears. The song was no longer an assault. It was a part of him. It was beautiful. He took a deep breath, and for the first time, he began to whistle. It was a simple, meandering tune, full of unexpected shifts and minor keys. He was learning the song. No one ever found out what happened to Dr. Thorne. He was simply gone. Dr. Jeremiah Arkham, with a weary sigh, filed another missing persons report. Another casualty of his family's cursed legacy. The asylum continued on as it always had. The screams echoed, the shadows danced, and the rain fell on Gotham. A few weeks later, a new patient was admitted to the Elizabeth Arkham wing. A quiet man with kind, tired eyes, found wandering the grounds. He didn't have a name, didn't seem to remember his past. He caused no trouble. In fact, he had a remarkably calming effect on the other inmates. He would just sit in his corner of the common room, staring at a blank spot on the wall with a faint, peaceful smile. And sometimes, when the asylum was quiet in the dead of night, the guards would hear it. A new voice had joined the choir, a soft, melodic whistling that intertwined perfectly with the old, familiar tune of Silas Croft. It was a sad and beautiful song, the song of the asylum itself. It was the sound of a new guardian taking his place, a new keeper of the flame, forever bound to the stone and sorrow of Arkham. Another lost soul added to its eternal, mad symphony. And out in the city, under the bruised and starless sky, a shadow in the shape of a bat would occasionally look towards the island, towards the madhouse, and feel a deep, unending chill, knowing that the battle for Gotham's soul was not just fought on its streets, but in the echoing corridors of that terrible, hungry place. The asylum always wins. The house always claims its own.